Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome back to the Learning from Financial Fraud series on the Treasury Update podcast. In this series, we explore multiple major financial fraud cases. We discuss how each one occurred and was kept hidden for a period of time, and we'll dissect how it was eventually discovered and get insight and guidance on how to prevent this type of situation from happening to you and your organization. I'm Jonathan, Media Production Specialist at Strategic Treasurer, and I'm here with Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner. Welcome back to the show, Craig.
It's good to be back. This is number 9 in the series.
That's correct, number 9.
I'm looking forward to this one as well as number 10. That's a pretty large series. So thanks for doing this.
So just to catch you up, back in the last Learning from Financial Fraud series a couple weeks ago, we talked about payment server breach. Do you want to give a recap on that?
Yeah. So a company's payment messaging server and confirmation server had been compromised. The criminals were able to get in, and what they did is they turned off all the financial messaging and confirmation activity, and they installed a Bitcoin mining program to generate a Bitcoin or Bitcoins, and loved the fact that they could use all the server capabilities. They didn't lose dollars, but that triggered and initiated this heartfelt look at what they were doing from payment security, from messaging, from permissioning, from the principle of least privilege, and really tighten things down, put an efficient process in place, and they were in a far, far better place than they were before.
Yeah, that was an interesting episode. And if you guys want to listen to it, I'll leave a link down in the show notes. But today we are talking about something somewhat similar, but also pretty different, a payment server and network compromise. You want to run us through the situation, Craig?
Yeah, this one has large dollars, including large dollar losses. There's elements of how could people let it get that bad? This example is one that also triggered one of the largest payment rails, messaging rails, to establish a minimum standard, an annual standard for securing the overall platform by making sure all the endpoints were hardened. So there's a really significant element here. There's also lessons to be learned about, knowing how to spell. All of those things are part of it. So the situation is a central bank's systems had been penetrated grievously to the point of, almost destroying the bank. It would be my interpretation of it. The criminals had access in so many different ways to the payment platform that they were using. So they were able to come in through areas where there were no firewalls. There were places where the company had access to the outside world without firewalls. They had some firewalls. Some of them were there. Some firewalls were not turned on, and there were access points without firewalls. So it's like we got locks on some doors. Some doors we have locks that we didn't use, and other doors are unlocked or there's not even doors. They also had other points of vulnerability where they had used, some of their servers, modems, routers, some of the switching devices that were used. They were set on the default settings, like admin and admin 1 were the ID and password or whatever it happened to be. PA, the A is an @ sign, so no criminal is going to figure that one out, and the O in Word is a 0. So it was really what the basic password is. You could query and see what the device was and use the default setting. Many of these were bought used, which is not necessarily a problem, but the passwords weren't there. Some of the settings for system access, when they were in test, they granted much more permissive or promiscuous access to the system during the testing phase. Then usually as you move from test into production, all of those permissions are locked down. You confirm that those are locked down. Well, not all of those were done. And so gaining access to credentials and IDs now meant you had full reign. There was the principle of least privilege did not exist. It was the principle of full access. The criminals didn't just say, I want to steal funds. They were like, I want to steal funds and get away with it. They had understood what was going on in the system. There were messages. In this case, it was using a Swift messaging server. They had all their internal systems generating payments, how they would move funds. And what did the criminals do? They also monitored what was happening. So when a message would go out, a confirmation would come back. Would come back to the servers. It would print out. It would show up on a screen. And this information would come back, and then whoever is in banking monitoring in the wire room is like, okay, yes, the wire went out. We got the confirmation number that it's been sent, it's delivered, the regular acknowledgement activity. And that would alert somebody if payments went out that were not authorized. We didn't originate this transfer. Why did it come back? The criminals monitored what was going on. They understood the end-to-end process, and they also timed everything to wait until right before long holiday weekend, when the activity was lower and slower. And they originated transfers of $951 million. So it's less than $1 billion, but it's real money. They initiated transfers for $951 billion. $101 million left their bank accounts, was sent out through the banking system internationally. The blocking of $850 million was blocked because of an anti-money laundering program at the bank. This was the central bank or the New York Fed. It was like, hey, this is not tracking with what's going on. This looks like it could be money laundering. It triggered a hold and a freeze on the accounts until they could get with the originating entity. Messages for $951 million were sent out. 101 million left. Now, when messages came back for these transfers, confirmation messages, they were deleted. The criminals had created a program. When a message would come back, if it identified a certain code, which the criminals would put in the messaging, like put in the OBI field or the messaging field, they put a certain code in there. If that code came back, the program would look for the receipt and delete it before it populated the system, before it sent it out to the originating areas to say, yeah, this wire transfer went out or this funds transfer occurred. Well, the purpose of that is to buy them time. I hope kids aren't listening, but you get caught more if you leave the mess and the evidence of your criminality out. Being secretive. The criminal needs time to get money out of the banking system. Time is not their friend. They need to expand time. And so how do they do that? They look at, hey, here's a long weekend. There's a holiday. They're going to be short-staffed. People are going to be exiting. And so the time to do it is when you've got a long weekend, you've got a holiday coming up. That provides more time. So that's a natural advantage. And that's when you want to be very closely monitoring what's going on. The second area is confirmations and acknowledgments, things that come back that say an action has occurred. That can trigger someone who may not be particularly intellectually curious, is like, hey, that's odd that there's a $20 million transfer. We didn't initiate a $20 million transfer. Did we fund for that? I don't remember that. Did you do that? That could occur. People should be monitoring what's happening to see if it matches what they had originated. There's a cash positioning aspect of it. There's an accounting. There's a daily view monitoring for fraud. Well, this hit it. The criminals were thorough enough and smart enough to understand the process and eliminated that from the view. So $101 million went out, and it moved. Most of the money moved to Macaw. It came out through casinos and chips and out of the banking system. And since it's out of the banking system, they never got $81 million back. They did get $20 million back. There's two reasons for that. And I can give some advice for criminals not to fall prey to these worst-in-class practices of criminals. But it came back. There was a smart banker who was like, this foundation should not have received $20 million. It's a very small foundation. The criminals had gained control of the account and the activity there. And so $20 million went in there and it was attempted to be moved out. And then the banker was like, no, we're not going to approve that. That just seems something's wrong. That doesn't make sense. Like, why would a foundation get in this much money and send it out? And the instructions that came with it had a misspelling. They spelled it foundation. Now, I don't know what the first language was of the criminal, but they spelled foundation wrong. Instead of foundation, it was foundation. And so that creates additional alerts, misspellings, just like you get those phishing emails. It's like, that's really spelled badly. I don't even consider serious because it's spelled so poorly. This is the case where when you're in school and the teacher tells you spelling's important, you're like, I got spell check, it doesn't matter. And then you make a spelling error on your transfer and the $20 million is stopped. Maybe it would have been stopped just because of the amount, but the idea that it was stopped heavily because of a spelling error makes you think, what kind of teasing or ribbing do you get? You couldn't even spell foundation right. And therefore $20 million, you lost $20 million. So I don't know what you get for the Scripps Spelling Bee Championship if you win, but I don't think it's $20 million. So that created a $20 million to be returned, but the $81 million is gone. Those are some of the highlights. There's a lot in there. It's easy to say, well, you always want to change your default password on stuff. And I'll tell you, we have, our cameras that we have in our building. We add more and more cameras and access points within our office.
What's the login information for those?
Yeah, it's admin download virus here. Several of the cameras, when we added onto the rest of the section of the building, we added some more cameras and they were connected into the system. When we granted our pen test company the right to come in, we granted them access into our network. We didn't have them sit outside and try to get in, and then if they got in, they can move laterally. We granted them access and permissioned them into the network. And so they could discover cameras. They discover cameras, and some of the new cameras set up. The passwords on that set up in the new section, ran through and had another setting. We hadn't replaced we hadn't reset the passwords on those. I mean, that's embarrassing to say, but that also became another checkpoint of we need to go through regularly and look at those. A pen test, for example, helps discover those things. It probes and finds them, just like your regular review. It's like, oh, I thought I had done that. No, that's not the case. Let's fix it before there's a problem. Granted, all you have access to is to be able to see what was on a camera. If someone had gained access into the company, they could see the hallway. But that's the same thing that occurred, at this bank. Routers and stuff were at the default password. And if you don't have vulnerability scanning and penetration testing on a regular basis, you will have lots of those items. You find these issues, and it's surprising what occurs.
You see that a lot with the videos where they're exposing those scam companies, where they'll get into their security system, and that's how they make the videos.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, you're scamming people, but you didn't lock down your security cameras. People kept, whether it was brute force or otherwise, they got into the system, and then they left the default password. Like, who would care about what's on a camera? Well, you want to lock all that stuff down. That's not what you want to see. Just like if they had access to your computer camera and they're like, I'm going to do something on the computer. I don't want to do it when you can see the screen go live or something happening, right? If they don't put it to sleep or freeze it, then someone can act on it when they're not around, right? The light's off, you're in another room.
Yeah, interesting. So what actions were taken after this happened?
Well, there was someone who got to retire. We'll put quotes on that. I know they added, the processes for things like pen testing. They had to support and comply with the SWIFT customer security program and the SWIFT security protocols about being part of that network. There was a activity to set up it wasn't described as much in the news, but the opportunity to set up a payment rail standard security process that not only supported the SWIFT customer security program activity, but also made sure they were checking and validating. They added limits on transfers, looked at all that activity, and then updated and confirmation of permissions and access for firewalls, routers, and systems. So that's something they moved on quickly to eliminate doors missing, locks not locked, locks missing.
So aside from actions, what else can we learn from this?
Yeah, there was a lot. There's a lot that can be learned from this one. I think one of the key areas of learning is the criminals have a pretty significant playbook. They will attack you to steal money, to steal information, to spoof you into giving money, and they have different ways of going about that, and they'll be relentless. And every point of exposure is a potential point of failure and point of fraud and criminality. And so our security has to take into account the principle of least privilege, limiting what what somebody can get if they gain access to some credentials, but also how you can respond to those situations if something, one layer has been compromised. Now you can shut it down. They haven't compromised 2 or 3 layers of security. So I think that's another key learning point for everybody is we have to know what the criminals are doing. We have to understand how our payment processes work and think like a criminal. How would I compromise this system? What information would I need? How could I delay having this found out? What could I take? Can I move money? Can I provide instructions to move money? Can I monitor and see what the operating method is in the organization so I can maximize my time to discovery, right? If I send $100 million wire out and 2 minutes later, the company discovers it was bad, they call their bank, it gets frozen, it's not moved to another bank and hasn't moved offshore, they'll be able to catch it. Even though these things are pretty instant, if you call quick enough, you can usually stop some of these transfers if it's almost immediate, especially for large sums. That does not mean you shouldn't block it in the front end, but the idea that rapid discovery and rapid follow-up, as opposed to being embarrassed, can put a freeze on these thefts before it leaves the banking system. Once your money's left the banking system, it's left the country, it's coming out in the form of casino chips or however it's exiting the banking system, you've pretty much lost your money. Now, there's been some interesting enforcement actions by U.S. and other Western country, I think other countries as well, law enforcement that has, found where, ransomware has collected significant money, usually in the form of digital currency, and then they put pressure on the digital currency wallet holders to claim the funds that they had taken by theft. And so that puts a damper on the crime pays really, really well for the criminals. So those are a few of the key areas. The other one I know, the last example we talked about was adding employee training and testing for payment security. I think that's extremely crucial that everyone should be doing cybersecurity training. There's just too many points of exposure for a company. But anyone and everyone involved in the payment process at some point needs to have regular payment security training and testing on that. You're a point of exposure. You need to know and understand how your organization can have money stolen or you can lose money for them. And having that, drilled into you, and there's a testing component. We see a strong correlation between those who are trained and those who suffer less losses. So they're more impervious to the attempts, not invulnerable completely, but the level of losses and the number of losses is significantly lower than their non-trained, non-tested from a payment security perspective.
Well, thanks for sharing all your insights on this payment server and network compromise case.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.